the UK there seems to be quite a thriving kind of industry of low budget horror and genre filmmakers. You may have heard the names Scott Jeffrey, Steve Lawson, Andrew Jones, and you've probably also heard Charlie Steeds. Steeds is actually one of the more creative low budget kind of genre filmmakers from the UK that I've reviewed a good many of his films, and for the most part I've quite enjoyed them. So here he is with Gods of the Deep, his latest movie, which is clearly influenced by Cthulhu mythos and H.P. Lovecraft in general. And it's kind of I was expecting like a Humanoids from the Deep style movie, but it's kind of a little bit more like Cthulhu mixed with like The Lost World is the best way I'll describe it. The story takes place with a group of scientists going on a deep sea exploration where they've discovered some type of structure deep in the seabed in an undiscovered kind of location. And there's an expedition to go into this kind of structure and explore. Whilst they're in there, they discover it may not be completely devoid of life, shall we say, and things start to take a turn for the worst for our scientific crew. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss Gods of the Deep. So a disclaimer, if you're unfamiliar with the work of Charlie Steeds, it is low budget. This is a low budget movie. And this movie actually is kind of somewhat typical of what I enjoy and what the shortcomings are with Charlie Steeds films. Compared to a lot of his contemporaries, I feel Charlie Steeds movies tend to be a little bit more ambitious, a little bit more meat on the bones in regards to kind of stories than a lot of his contemporaries, and it is true of this one. Like I said, this is not just a bunch of girls go into a house and chased around by some kind type of masked killer. Scott Jeffrey, I'm looking at you. It is actually quite a more in-depth plot involving kind of conspiracies, betrayals, kind of ancient kind of creatures, all sorts of stuff. If you're familiar with Cthulhu, you'll kind of get where I'm going with that one. And the story is interesting. It is flawed in regards to its budgetary constraints and kind of like quickness, but the actual story itself, I have to say, I was quite interested in. Now, admittedly, I'm quite a fan of like aquatic horror movies, and this one will remind you of movies like Leviathan and Deep Star 6 in a lot of ways. You know, we have this underwater kind of crew coming face to face with kind of some kind of monstrous entity that causes them problems, and it's kind of like those movies. So if you're a fan of, as I say, Leviathan, Deep Star 6, even like to a degree like The Abyss, then you know it's one you want to check out if you don't mind a low budget, that is. One of the critiques I have had with Charlie Steeds movies in the past, I think the acting has been a mixed bag. I would say there are still a couple of issues here, but generally speaking, I actually think the acting was better here, and the character seemed a little bit more kind of well-rounded. I quite like the camaraderie of our team. They kind of just seem more like kind of regular folk, if that makes sense, and I kind of quite enjoyed that that kind of interplay between the kind of the members and that kind of like professional but kind of friendly banter that they kind of had with each other. For me personally, I actually thought the first half of the movie, which is effectively the descent and then going kind of discovering the kind of like what's in this kind of structure, was the stronger half. That sense of exploration and kind of discovery, and we do get some kind of quite big moments, creature feature moments in the movie. I mean, they're a little flawed. We'll come on to it. But I kind of, despite the budget, I have to say, again, I like the ambition here. I thought it opens up an interesting kind of world, and I like the story and the pacing of it, certainly kind of in the first half of the movie. And again, despite some clear budget restrictions, again, I think it's inventive filmmaking for the most part. Will you care that it's inventive filmmaking compared to versus such a low budget? I don't know, but nonetheless, as long as you can kind of remove your "that's not scientifically plausible" hat, then you may enjoy this one. And I think certainly the first half of the movie I think was quite well paced, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. What doesn't work in this movie, as you may have kind of picked up, I think the second half of the movie, which is effectively the ascent back, is not quite as well thought out. This is where it tries to incorporate more of the metaphysical kind of H.P. Lovecraft ideas here. I don't think it kind of works as well. We switch to a more of a terrestrial threat, and it's kind of one of those things where, okay, you know, we can't afford to do flashy effects for a lot of the time, so we'll switch to a kind of a more terrestrial threat that we've seen many. It's a trick that we've seen in many kind of low budget movies, and it's one that this movie employs as well. But let's talk about the budget, because I feel this is going to be a point of contention for a lot of people. I would say the budget is typical of a Charlie Steeds movie. And if you're looking at movies like he's done before, you can kind of get away with it because he uses a lot of like the natural environment. Like if you look at Werewolf Castle and things like that, a lot of external shots. Here, it's pretty much all on a set. The problem is that we're meant to believe this is like the interior of a submarine. Let me just give you one example of kind of where the budget here really shows through. So we have a lab there's this like underwater submarine. You know, it's obviously not how submarines work. And considering we've had in 2023 there was a submarine tragedy, this one seems ill-timed to a certain degree. But anyway, if you can kind of just look past that, just look at the kind of like we have this lab, for example. The doorway to the lab has those like beaded like things that hang down. Look, what you get like 70s house, you know, 70s, your grandma's house, those kind of beads that kind of hang down through doorways. And I think that's meant to be like the kind of hermetically sealed, you know, doorway and things. And then we have like this, we have a sample, like a biological sample, and we've got to secure it, so we put a piece of foam over it. And I'm thinking, oh Jesus. So there is like real budgetary constraints here. And you know, I am not too picky in regards to, I understand that low budget B movie filmmaking, you can kind of accept that you are simply not going to have the budget to create a scientifically correct environment. And even like movies like Deep Star 6 and Leviathan, they were considerably higher budget than this one. But will people care? Will they look at this movie and think, my God, this looks like a set from like, you've just made it up in someone's house? And there's a few kind of like, again, silly moments. We have this, we made it believe that they're like record depths in regards to how deep they've gone. But there's like a little rover which is kind of like loads of glass around it. You know, it's just... It's just so scientifically implausible. I think it goes beyond, you know, where you can kind of like that sense of, oh well, we'll just kind of like go with it. It's just it goes a little bit too far, I think, in the realms of plausibility, even if you are somewhat forgiving with it. So yeah, it's a kind of a very, very low budget affair. We have these creature effects, and again, I can accept that this is a low budget movie, but I think there will be those people who just think it looks a little bit too crappy with them. A movie like, I don't know, Werewolf Castle, you've got werewolves out in the woods or in kind of like actual kind of like castles, and yes, we see the modern kind of railings and stuff, but yeah, you can forgive it. Here it's like it's a little bit more obvious, is what I'm kind of saying. So the budget restraints really does show through in this movie compared to a lot of other kind of Charlie Steeds films. Although I think the acting is improved, there are some still kind of like some dialogue that is a little bit kind of clunky, and some of the line delivery is a little bit kind of stilted still at times. Although I would generally say I actually thought the acting here was actually better than a lot of previous movies that we have had mixed results from the Charlie Steeds stable of actors. The second half, I just think, is not as strong. It's a little bit kind of like one note. I think some of the kind of The decisions that were made are very obvious and not particularly well thought out at times. So overall, personally, I mean, I still kind of enjoyed this movie with some serious kind of like, roped, because I can understand the low budget here, but I still enjoyed the principal idea at least, even though I think the execution obviously is very kind of rough and ready. But can you accept that? Can you accept a low budget movie which has the ambition and an interesting story, but really doesn't have the finesse or the budget to kind of really have smooth out those rough edges, because there are some rough edges. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. So that's and where I'm at with this movie. It's kind of somewhat typical. So that's kind of an average score. It's not bad, but it's not great. So, have you seen Gods of the Deep? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.